This video is sponsored by Lost in Cult. There are several dead MMOs I've briefly dipped my toes into during the past year or so, but The Matrix Online was by far the weirdest. It was intriguing enough to me that this game, unlike the many other fantasy-based settings I had encountered, was based in a late 20th century inspired city. The title was released in 2005 and officially shut down in 2009, with a somewhat dramatic closure that involved player characters getting crumpled up like pieces of paper. Thankfully, dedicated fans put in the time and effort to partially revive the game with the Matrix Online emulator, and even though many of the features like combat and most of the gameplay elements aren't available, my sole wish to simply explore the abandoned corners of this realm was granted. The startup user interface instantly shows its dedication to the aesthetic of the Matrix films, imitating a rusted metal terminal monitor that could exist aboard the hovercrafts we see in the movies. With my credentials in hand, I logged in, and was greeted by a voice searching for a new red pill to join the human resistance. In other words, the character I was about to create. Not concerned with any stats in this case, I jumped straight over to customizing my appearance, spending way too long flicking between various Y2K styles before settling on what I felt was a pretty good attempt at a Matrix-y outfit. After choosing my handle, I was taken to a menu screen that displayed the interior of a hovercraft in the background, and I clicked through the different features showing stats, cinematics, and fast travel points. Finally ready, I left the default location selected and jacked into the Matrix. I personally love to get as much insight as I can into a game's history to see how they're made and what inspired them, with physical media being a great source for this. Today's sponsor Lost in Cult are creating premium deep dive books on titles like Outer Wilds and Animal Well within their DesignWorks range. And their latest exciting collaboration with Remedy Entertainments is the Alan Wake DesignWorks book. It covers both of the main Alan Wake titles as well as its spin-off American Nightmare, resulting in a one-of-a-kind exclusive deep dive into the series through new insights, interviews, and concept art across its 250+ pages. This includes words from Sam Lake, Ilka Villi, Matthew Peretta, and many, many more, shedding light upon the series in unprecedented detail. As always though, there is a very special deluxe edition available until the pre-order period ends on October 17th, which is a must-have for any superfans of the series as it comes with numerous extra treasures like a crime file folder, Coffee World poster, an eau de diner napkin, crime scene Polaroids, bookmarks, postcards, a full Bright Falls fold-out map, and a card signed by actors Matthew Peretta and Ilka Villi. There's even a full manuscript for return, available fully in print for the first time ever. And all of these goods are encased within a stunning foil block finished box, with the book sporting a translucent wrap with a dust jacket based on the in-game return cover. It has to be one of the most visually pleasing gaming books I've ever seen, and the standard edition looks incredible too. But if you want the deluxe edition, you'll have to act fast as limited quantities are available. So if this interests you, please show your support and help support my channel in turn by using code EurothugAlan at lostincult.co.uk to get 5% off Alan Wake DesignWorks or anything across the site right now. A link will be in the description too. A huge thank you to Lost in Cult for consistently supporting the channel. I materialized in downtown Center Park, testing out my controls in this new space by examining NPCs and equipping abilities like hyperspeed for very fast running, and also a hyper jump that allowed me to reach any nearby roof. I ran around for a bit, even stumbling upon a subway station that sadly wasn't functional, so I opened up my map to see just how big this game world is. At a glance, it didn't seem like much to explore, but shortly afterwards, I would understand this city was immense because almost every door I tested would in fact open, leading me into hallways upon hallways of strange rooms, and even elevators that indicated there were 8 floors in one of the structures I had entered by random. I got lost almost immediately, and I knew I'd have to come up with a more methodical way to tackle exploration, especially because the downtown area I was in was only one of the 4 main areas of Megacity. This didn't include the smaller side areas like the tutorial, so I figured I'd start with those first. But before that, my mind was set on customizing my character further and getting an even better outfit put together for my upcoming adventure, as I discovered there were far more clothing pieces I could get. Using the chat commands and a really cool fan-made presentation that showcased the various options in the form of a fashion magazine, I added accessories of interest to my inventory and experimented with what was available. It was exactly what you'd expect to see in the Matrix setting. Black leather tops, trench coats, gloves, and of course, tiny sunglasses. Although shiny black vinyl-like finishes on dark clothing are featured a lot throughout the various options, they come in all kinds of colours too, allowing more freedom than the standard Matrix fashion palette. The movies had a huge impact on real-world trends, and the aesthetic is the main aspect of the series that I've always adored. And trying out different cyber-gothic styles, brimming with zips, buckles, and mesh, not only reminded me of the films, but also acted as a virtual view into Y2K fashion. After what might have been a couple hours, I finally completed my new fit, and so it was time for me to start scouting out the vast virtual world ahead of me. I did briefly research what there is to see in the Matrix Online, and it seemed that not all areas could be easily accessed via foot. So using the emulator's web settings and details from a forum post, I figured I'd go through all of the areas outside of the 4 main megacity districts first. Starting at the top of the list, I teleported myself to the tutorial environment and used commands to get to the correct coordinates. These locations included a fancy office, extraction room, subway platform, and dojo, as well as the white room seen in the first Matrix film that looks just as striking in-game. Next up were the 2 archive areas which held giant concrete and metal structures that seemed reminiscent of a kind of combat base of sorts, possibly even a resistance settlement existing outside of the Matrix. It contrasted the subsequent Ashencourt zone, which had a burning red sky above a landscape littered with broken buildings, gravestones, and occasional circles of candles on the ground. Later, I'd find a place called Widow's Moor that was almost identical aside from having a snowy, less daunting atmosphere thanks to the absence of a blood-red sky. I briefly jumped into an area named Datamine, which was looking a little more like an industrial part of Megacity with a couple odd broken bridges here and there, and was pleasantly surprised to see that Sakura, the next location on the list, appeared to be a Japanese-style settlement. Despite repeating a lot of its architecture and other features, the peaceful nature of this place staved off my boredom for a while, and like Ashencourt, Sakura also had a snowy version called Yuki. So far, these places had been very empty, with very few doors leading me to interiors to explore, but Sati's playground had a lot more hidden inside its structures. In this miniature slice of Megacity, I could enter the rundown buildings ahead of me, taking myself on a self-guided tour through each floor. Apartments were spacious, but with far too little furniture to accommodate the oversized rooms, all of them failed to feel like a home at all. Details for these abodes included leftover food, random paintings, and abandoned pairs of shoes, all existing within the most bizarre apartment layouts I've ever seen. Eventually, I even chanced upon a lab of sorts, with chemicals sitting upon several shelves standing against the walls, and another room that was hoarding PCs and monitors. Sometimes I'd come across NPCs, like a lady sitting at a desk with a computer geek's handbook next to her setup, which was about the only interesting feature in the face of the rest of the depressingly empty room. Something I had noticed at this point though was how well this virtual world replicated aspects of 90s interior design in its individual parts. Wallpaper and flooring combos hit me with a wave of nostalgia, and certain patterns, furniture styles, and carpeted elevators made me realize how much of this had become almost extinct in real cities over the past few decades. But these designs are forever treasured within this dead MMO that has no choice but to be stuck in time. That being said, I also realized that I had yet to stumble across a bathroom, which I guess makes sense since there'd be no reason for a player to search for one in a game like this, but the thought of toilets possibly not existing in the Matrix Online was quite amusing. The only context I have for this area is its name, with Sati being a character in the movies, and the courtyard in the middle also looked like the area where Neo fights an army of Agent Smiths. I think investigating these spaces so far without any research made these environments feel even more surreal, and sometimes I struggled to connect them to what I envisioned taking place in the Matrix series at all. Though at the same time, I enjoyed having my expectations subverted, and my mind wandered to imagining what players would engage with here back in the original game's heyday. Without the objectives presented by gameplay and social elements, every odd corner of the world stood out like a sore thumb, like recognizing things that are out of place that give away that this is a simulation, all the more relevant given its source material. The remaining side areas had names simply based on their size, like Large 2, Medium 1, and Small 3. These each took place in warehouses, shipping yards, or other snippets that could just be extracted from the main megacity map, for instance. One even had the exact same room layouts as the other worker I saw before, this time with a different model, and Medium 1 took place on an island with a giant staircase to nowhere in the middle of it. The only other map of note was Large 1, which featured a restaurant and an office building that felt almost endless when traversing through its liminal hallways. The sight of desks and cubicles lined up without any workers gave me the strangest feeling. There was something therapeutic about them, which might come from my own past experience of staying late at work in an office space. But that was coupled with a sense of sadness, like all these assets and rooms have hardly been perceived by anybody in so long. They're made to be seen by players, and haven't been able to fulfill that purpose. With all of these side locations out of the way, it was now time for me to tackle the main 4 districts: Downtown, Westview, Richland, and International. Starting off with Westview, I surveyed the map and decided to make sure to visit every notable landmark I could see, as well as exploring any buildings that caught my interest either by architecture or signage. Instantly though, I was distracted by the ginormous bridge next to me stretching out into the distance, and although the toll booths seemed to block my path, I used some good old commands to get past it. I kept clipping through it, however, so I ended up just running alongside it for several minutes, growing restless and teleporting myself ahead until I finally reached its abrupt end. It wasn't the most spectacular sight, though perhaps I was one of the few players to ever witness it firsthand, which still felt special in its own way. Westview had a handful of monuments labelled on its map, and I of course paid a visit to each one in my sightseeing quest. They basically look like art installations, often quite abstract in appearance, and perhaps they once provided easy rendezvous spots for players to meet at. Other gatherings most likely occurred at the clubs in the game, and the first one I came across was Club Succubus. It featured a front desk that looked like it doubled as a cloakroom, though that was almost certainly just a visual thing, as players would have no reason to drop off their coats when they have an inventory system right on them. Still, I imagine the idea of virtual clubbers fully committing to roleplay, which I think is kinda wholesome. Inside the venue, there was a dance floor and bar, with NPCs fulfilling their roles as bartenders, dancers, and DJs under swirling red lights. There was a balcony with seating too, which offers a respite for those who want a break from the dancing and noise. I found that the layout of this entire club would be practically copy-pasted onto the others I went to, with the only main difference being the colour of the lights and minor decorative changes to fit their theming. Other non-residential interiors I stumbled upon included local bar-type settings with an area for live music or games, one of which led me to an entire office room behind it. There were even a couple different shop environments that I'd find repeated in numerous buildings, like a quaint bookstore, a clothing store with changing rooms, and a place for groceries. There was also a shop that sold a selection of very random stuff, from leather jackets to basketball hoops and laundry detergent, I think. And all of these could be found again and again with little to no variation across not just Westview, but pretty much every main district. The diners, which were fewer in number in comparison, were probably among my favourite sights to see. They looked so cozy inside and were also the busiest spots in terms of NPCs, feeling slightly more alive but still charmingly nonsensical. Westview was home to a couple churches too, which to my surprise featured the very first toilets I had seen in the entire game up until this point. The main halls, like every other space, are incredibly large in volume while everything else is proportioned normally, amplifying its emptiness time and time again. One of the churches stuck out in my memory though, with Morpheus just lying on top of an altar at the back of the stage. It's worth saying at this point that he does in fact die in the events of the Matrix Online, so this is maybe a funeral or something? Either way, I thought the NPC nearby would clear up my confusion, but unfortunately the dialogue was completely random. The remaining streets I had left to search presented me with inexplicable ruined buildings, a gloomy arcade, and a storeroom full of cash which could be pointing towards virtual money laundering schemes. Neighbouring interiors often made no sense being next to each other, to the point where sometimes I didn't even understand what the building was intended for anymore. Aside from what felt like endless office buildings and apartments, I found a hotel with a bizarre empty space behind the reception, straight up broken floors, and many strange rooms with sparse furniture placed against their walls, leaving ample room for players, but it was just me and me alone in every one of them. Well, except the singular room that had zombies hanging out in it for some reason. That essentially concluded my tour of Westview, and it was time to cross over the other side to Richland. Fairly similar to Westview, Richland also has its share of churches and the same kind of monuments, though it appeared to be the higher-end part of town. Buildings were cleaner for the most part, and more expensive from what I noticed running through the streets and jumping over rooftops. The latter ability was extremely useful, getting nice views of the city below, and you basically hold the cursor near the top of the screen, which pulls the camera view higher until you reach the part you want to jump to. I was honestly quite impressed it worked so well, and using the hyperjump never got old. In terms of fast travel, there are multiple telephone boxes across the map, which are called hardline points, and just like the movies, you can use them to travel between places. It's wild how many aspects of the film translate so well into video game formats, whether mechanically or thematically. Visually, I felt like the in-game megacity matched the aesthetic perfectly too, and together with the day and night cycle, I could call back to all kinds of scenes. Richland would hold a few more surprises in store, like how some of the structures had a whopping 26 floors, or the existence of spinning doors. It also finally had a couple clubs with different layouts, like one based in a warehouse and another on the top floor of an office building that was apparently selling very cheap drinks. From what I found, this district also featured a couple more toilets and workspaces in townhouses, with one home having a total of 3. I was definitely in the expensive area if it wasn't already obvious from the name. Still, there seemed to be slightly more affordable apartments too, as I assumed the building I found that had a lift opening up into someone's living room on each floor would come with certain discounts. I looked upon car parks and construction sites during my journey through the streets outside, and I saw that the work sites were curiously marked on the map. I wondered if these were placeholders for future buildings that would have held new content for players, in which case that is probably the best contextualization for MMO updates I've ever witnessed. What I couldn't quite understand though was that there were several locations where there were very large groups of often the same type of NPC just standing around. They didn't all seem to be of enemy status either, so I had no clue what was happening here. Regardless, I welcomed the oddities of this world, and I was always incredibly happy to find new assets and room types in the sea of workplaces and residences. It had become apparent to me though that exile hideouts, which seemed to be dungeon levels, would often have a unique facade that hides the flaws of what I assume would contain combat and loot. For example, one hideout within a school had some very peculiar hallways and classrooms with not a single believable student in sight. Another in Westview took place in an abandoned subway, and later on in the other 2 districts, I would discover hideouts in hotels and even a museum. There are a few unwalkable areas I saw in a forum post in the main districts too, which from what I saw when I teleported to them would include more white rooms and hallways of unopenable doors, clearly meant to be the back doors in the Matrix lore. Now it was time to move on to the 3rd district on my list, that being the downtown area. The buildings here are basically skyscrapers, and even the ads and billboards are more impressive than what I had previously seen. Also, the monuments were instead mostly company logo sculptures that sat in front of their accompanying offices, and there were also quite a lot of unmanned popcorn and hot dog stands. The clubs here also had a slight more variation too, with a couple of new types present, one of which can be found in buildings that have a walkway stretching between its dance floor and bar area situated in separate towers, and the other kind separates its dancing area, bar and lounge between different floors. However, there was a certain club that caught me off guard as its top floor, which would be the dance floor in the other clubs that share its layout, instead had a really weird table in the middle of it. Anyway, I went through what was probably dozens of other offices and even took a moment to look at parking garages and car models to notice that 2000's time capsule effect on its vehicle design too. The receptions and lobbies I travelled through were even fancier than anything in Richland, and I couldn't even begin to fathom the rent prices in this area. But then, as I was running along the pavements, annoyingly while I wasn't recording my footage, I saw something that I thought would not have been possible. At first, my eyes latched onto what I assumed to be an NPC moving very quickly, and not in the same pattern I had seen 100 times before. I dashed towards them, and just like I had noticed their presence, they noticed mine too and stopped. It was another player. I quickly hit the record button and opened my chat box, still in shock that I was seeing a real human being in this world after an entire week of being completely alone here. Clearly, my new acquaintance was surprised to see me as well. We chatted for a bit, and it turns out she was new to the Matrix Online just like me, and after learning that it was canon in the Matrix lore, she wanted to try it out. She taught me how to use the dancing emotes, and we continued to talk while busting out some cool moves. Plus, I used the opportunity to ask why there are so many office buildings in the game, to which she responded that from what she had read, most stuff a show. But players could build custom maps called constructs just like the movies, so she assumed those offices were for player-owned buildings. Not only that, but she had found a massive fan-made document called the Matrix Online Archives that spanned a little over 500 pages worth of information on the game. So we moved our conversation to Discord so she could kindly send it over to me before I had to log off. I barely made a dent reading the page count before releasing this video, since there is an immense amount of in-game lore covered, but I'll include a link for it in the description. The last spot I had to visit in downtown megacity was Club Hell, which you may recognise the name of as it's the same one seen in the movie. I entered via a parking garage that held the lift to the club, though I had no idea what floor it was on, so I tried them all. They were mostly all the same save for 2 of them. One had a bunch of NPCs and Easter egg characters, with Morpheus and Colonel Sanders, aka the architect, dancing on 2 platforms. The other floor was practically swarming with models of an NPC called Randy and also some models of Sati. I don't know the relevance of an army of Randys, but I think I'm glad it exists. Finally, I could now go to the final district on my list, International. It's the smallest area of them all and is kinda like the Chinatown of Megacity, described to encompass various cuisines and architecture of a handful of Asian cultures. It was a nice change of scenery from the preceding environments which I had already become accustomed to, and I couldn't believe my eyes when I entered one of the subway stations to see a train at the platform. Sadly, it still didn't function, but I could at least view the map and watch the trains come and go. The interiors take on a new style for the International District, with stunning receptions and sliding doors in the mix, and there's even dojos and sushi restaurants dotted throughout the map. Partly due to its size, there wasn't much to see, but I did find a small homeware shop and a weird laundromat at the back of the White Lotus Hotel. The clubs were just the default type too, so again, nothing of note here. Still, the atmosphere of the district was refreshing to immerse myself in, and it had its fair share of oversized interior spaces with eerily little decoration. While I didn't have time to dig through the insane amounts of information that's available on the game, I did learn that they used to have actual humans sometimes act as NPCs during in-game events. It was a really cool concept, blurring the line between the virtual world and reality, but it did mean that the original experience is now lost, and it makes me even sadder to think that I can't ever be part of that golden age for this now dead MMO. However, there's a lot that the emulator does offer, and you can freely visit locations that appear in the movies if you just wanted to do some virtual sightseeing. You'll come across familiar characters in the cutscene player and game world too. Before I had begun my adventure in the game world, I read that apparently dance parties would occasionally take place in the Matrix Online emulator, and noticed that there were still notifications going out for the radio playlist. I really wanted to try joining one, so I waited patiently one evening and got my clubbing outfit ready, staying up late so I could catch the notification as it appeared. And while I could listen to the music, I was a little confused because there were no details anywhere that noted the location. I thought it best I visit as many clubs as I could, but I couldn't see a single person in any of them. After a few failed attempts, I remembered that the site for the emulator says how many players are online and in what district, which would give me a rough idea of where people could be. When I went to look, however, I could see that only one player was online, and before I jumped to any conclusions, I logged myself out of the game to see if it would update, which only confirmed that I was in fact the only person playing. But with my journey in the Matrix Online now coming to an end, I knew I had to experience a dance party to close it all off. So I set a date and put the poster invite I made in my Discord server, and of course extended it to my new acquaintance I had met in-game. I got my clubbing outfit back on and even made a kinda cursed shared playlist, which I can't show in this video because of copyright unfortunately, but I can tell you that at one part I seamlessly transitioned a Rude Sandstorm into the hamster dance. The day of the party arrived and I sent out the location coordinates and playlist link, choosing floor 9 of Club Hell as the venue. I watched as people started to filter onto the dance floor, resulting in an amazing group all dancing together for an hour or so in this dead MMO. I had no idea what the server limit was, but thankfully it sustained all 19 of us, until we started flooding it with emotes, jumping, and rolling, at which point it started to lag for a bit and had some people rolling endlessly into walls. It was a resounding success regardless, and it got pretty crazy up in the club with backflips, vomiting, and people taking their clothes off. Oh, and if you need a DJ, I also do weddings, by the way.
Alright guys, hope you had a good night. You'll have to leave now. Yeah, it's done. It's over, yeah. I do weddings as well, by the way, so just come grab a business card if you're interested. Birthday parties, all that, yeah, I do all of it. Alright, hope you had a good one. See you next time. There won't be a next time.
The virtual worlds of MMOs are built to house hundreds and thousands of players at once, creating digital vast landscapes in the process. The design choices made specifically to accommodate such a large player base aren't normally noticeable in servers full of life and movement, but when an MMO dies, there's no more distractions from the strange world existing beneath it all. Rooms and buildings feel impossibly empty. Forgotten places boast an even stronger sense of liminality and uncanniness. It was a sentiment that was ever present during my hours with the Matrix Online emulator, and if anything, it made the moments where I wasn't alone all the more memorable. Thanks to all the players for all their hard work in documenting a lost era and keeping the emulator up and running. Without them, I would have never been able to explore Megacity. A huge thank you to my patrons for supporting the channel, and thank you for watching. If you'd like to see my future work, you're more than welcome to subscribe and stay notified. Have a good one, and I'll see you in the next one.